Welcome back. This is Sandy with Sandy's Organized Chaos, and today I am going to be showing you how I make my drip tumbler with matching epoxy coaster. So let's get to it. For this tutorial, I will be using a Hog Curvy 12-ounce tumbler. Please feel free to use any tumbler you like. The glitters I will be using for the tumbler and coaster are a fine white and a fine hot pink. I will also be using diner dots from Mr. Nola's glitter. I will also be using a pearlescent powder, which is from Alumilite. It is essentially a mica powder, so you can use any type of mica powder that you might have on hand. And I will also be using my 4x4 beveled silicone coaster mold that I purchased from PDB Blanks and glitter. I'm going to prep my tumbler and paint it white. Then I will use 2 pumps each of A and B of my Alumilite Epoxy, which will be 4 ounces all together. After I have that all mixed up, I'm going to apply a thin coat of my epoxy to my tumbler. Now I'm going to take my white and I'm just going to kind of go over the entire tumbler. I don't want to coat it too much right now because I still want those diner dots to stick. Now I'm going to take my diner dots and I'm going to just give a good sprinkle of those all over the tumbler. I think they are so fun and pretty, and I think they go really well with the drip that goes on with this tumbler too. I always like to make sure that I shake that tumbler really well to make sure all those diner dots are stuck down. And then I'm going to come back through and I'm going to layer that white on really thick onto that epoxy. I'm going to place that on my turner, let it cure, and then after it's cured, I will add another clear coat of epoxy to my tumbler, and then we will be ready to move on to the drip. With that extra epoxy that we had mixed up for the tumbler, I'm going to use that for the coaster. I separated it into 2 cups, and into 1 cup I will place the pearlescent powder and diner dots, and into the 2nd cup I will place my hot pink glitter. Now after I had that mixed up, I decided it needed just a little bit more sparkle, so I added some of my white glitter to my pearlescent powder and diner dots mix. Every epoxy is different. With Alumilite Amazing Clear Cast, the open time is about 30 minutes to an hour, so I let my epoxy sit for about 15 minutes before I decided to add it to my coaster. Now I'm going to take my mixture and I'm going to place a thin stripe of that pink at what will be the top of the coaster. You need to be too fussy about this. That's what's great about handmade items. You want it to look handmade. I'm going to take my other mixture of the white pearlescent and diner dots, and I'm just going to fill in the rest of this void with that. Now, if you remember, we needed to add another coat of clear epoxy to our tumbler before we could do the drip, so I won't be unmolding this until we are fully ready to move on to the next stage. Now I kind of wanted to share with you guys something I like to do with some of this extra epoxy that you might have on hand after doing all your tumblers. I like to take all that extra epoxy and I turn them into what I call dump coasters. I just have a little 3x3 circle coaster mold, and I just like to take all that extra epoxy and dump anything I have left over into them. This is a great way to experiment with inks and other glitters that you might have on hand, just to kind of see what looks nice whenever you go to create coasters. Essentially, I make these for my kids for their drinks, so that way they know whose drink is whose. Another great thing is I like to come in, it doesn't have to be perfect because these are just dump coasters. So I'll actually leave bits and pieces open, and as I have extra epoxy, I just come in and fill in the extra spaces. This is pretty much how I taught myself how to do coasters. Okay, back to what we were doing. My tumbler is fully cured with that second coat. My coaster is fully cured, and I'm going to mix up 1 ounce each of A and B of my epoxy. Now that I have this unmolded, I really like how that curve kind of turned out when we applied that pink with the white together. I have my sprinkles, I have my hot pink, and we are ready to do the drip on our coaster. Only need a little bit of epoxy to do this drip. I'm going to take my pink and I'm going to stir that up really well, and then I'm going to let it sit for a good half hour. Now, as you can see here, when I go to do a stripe down the middle of my epoxy, it doesn't move very much, and that's what you want. You want it nice and thick. Now it is ready to add to our coaster mold first. To take my hot pink mixture, and I'm just going to put a nice thick coat along what will be the top of the coaster. I'm going to make sure you take your stick and push it all the way up against that lip of the coaster mold. You don't want any of that coaster showing through your pink epoxy. What we are doing here is essentially the same thing we will be doing to our tumbler. Now I'll be lifting it up, and I'm just going to kind of see where the drips are going to naturally form. Now I'm going to take my stick and I'm just going to kind of help it. I'm going to add just a little bit more epoxy here and there. I just want to help the process. As I always say, there is no right or wrong when it comes to making art, and this is essentially art. Now I'm going to take my faux sprinkles and I'm going to sprinkle that onto my coaster. After I have those on, I like to just come through and push any of those sprinkles in that may be kind of hanging out. Now I'm going to come through and set that epoxy with my glitter. I like to take my fine glitter and I add a really good dose of that glitter to the epoxy mix. Because we let that epoxy set up really well, I just kind of tap off the excess glitter, and then I could just kind of see if I like how the drips are. And I kind of don't like how the one drip is, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to add a little bit more epoxy. Now I'm just going to kind of come through and I added just an extra little drip coming off the one side. I just felt like it needed it. Now I'm just going to come through and repeat that process with the sprinkles and glitter. I'm going to let this fully cure, and then I'm going to add its final coat of clear epoxy to the top of it. I'm just going to show you how I finish up my coaster first. I like to come through with a nice hard bristle brush and sweep away any of that extra glitter, and then I'm going to put a nice coat of clear coat over the entire coaster. Now I want to make sure that I leave a little bit of that lip to the coaster, so that way nothing falls off when somebody puts their cup onto it. Sometimes when you unmold these coaster molds, there will be a little bit of an edge. So I like to take my X-Acto knife and come through and just kind of shave off some of that edge, and then I will take some really fine grit sandpaper and just kind of sand it as well. You want to make sure that when you use that sandpaper, you don't hit the coaster itself, only its corners, because if you hit the coaster, it will dull the shine of the coaster. I'm not adding any personalization to this coaster, but if you wanted to do that, you should do that before you apply your final coat of epoxy. Now the coaster is done and we'll move on to the drip portion of our tumbler. My tumbler is fully cured with that second coat of epoxy and we are ready to move on. We are going to do exactly like how we did the coaster. I add my pink and then I let it sit for 30 minutes, if not longer. Once that is done setting up, I'm going to take my fully cured tumbler and I will place it onto my turner and we will be ready to add the pink epoxy to it. What I like to do is just come around and do a thin stripe first, and then once I feel comfortable, I do a nice thick stripe all the way around the top of that tumbler. I'm going to take that stripe that I just did and I'm going to make sure that it is all the way up to the rim of the tumbler. It's okay if it looks a little thin because we are going to come back through just like we did the coaster and we will add another coat of that pink glitter. So just as long as it has that epoxy touching the top of that rim, it will fully fill in once we add that glitter. I'm just going to continue to do this around the tumbler and then I'm going to let it spin for another 15 minutes. Here I will show you the side view of how much epoxy I apply to that rim. Once this has set up, I'm going to take my tumbler and face it down onto my table, and I'm just going to kind of see where the drips will form naturally. Then, just like the coaster, I will take my stick and I'll help everything kind of move down a little bit better. Now, yes, I'm a grown woman, and yes, I'm on TikTok, and I just kind of want to show you what I did on TikTok. This is kind of just a view I did, and it kind of blew up, so this is kind of why I'm doing this tutorial. Now that I have those drips where I want them, I'm going to come through and I'm going to put my sprinkles on first. Now I kind of like a lot of sprinkles, so I'm going to kind of put a lot of sprinkles on mine, but you don't have to add so many sprinkles if you don't want to, or you don't even have to add sprinkles. It's completely up to you. Now I'm going to give it a good shake because I don't want any of those sprinkles to get into my pink glitter, and we will give it a good douse of that pink. Now I found over the years that the more glitter you apply to your epoxy, the faster it seems to set up or not move as much. So that's why I like to come through and just give it that nice good douse of glitter after I am done with everything. And it will also fill in all those spots that just seemed like they were a little too thin. Just like the coaster, once your drip is fully cured, you'll come in with your hard bristle brush and you'll just sweep away any of that extra glitter that may be on the tumbler. Then you can add your personalization and then give it another coat of clear epoxy all the way up to that rim because it will only further set those sprinkles onto the tumbler. And it is all done. Whether you duplicate this design or you make it something completely your own, I hope that you had fun watching this tutorial. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys next time.